In this video, we learn how to sketch the graphs of modulus function. We already know from the previous lesson that absolute value of -3 will be +3, and absolute value of +3 will still be 3. So let's see how we can sketch the graph of y is equal to x and the graph of y equals absolute value of x. Well, there's a simple way to sketch it. If we pick any value of x, maybe from -6, -4, -2 to 0, 2, 4, 6, for example. There are many ways of solving it. I just want to use this for illustration. Okay, so since y equals x, the y values also remain the same as -6, -4, -2, 0, 2, 4, 6. All right, so now let's see. Let's say these are perfectly drawn axes. This is the x-axis. This is the y-axis. 2, 4, 6, -2, -4, -6, 2, 4, 6, -2, -4, -6. Okay. When x is 0, y is 0, so it passes through here. 2, 2, this is 2, 2, 4, 4, 6, 6. -2, 2, -4, 4, -6, 6. So this is simply a straight line passing through all these points for y equals x. But we can see that when we change it to absolute value of x, the absolute value of x will be +6 because absolute value of -6 is +6. And this will be +4, +2, 0, 2, 4, 6. So in that case, we can see that this section of the graph will remain the same. From this up to here will remain the same. But this will be positive. Instead of -6, it will be +6. So it is just a reflection of this section across the x-axis. Instead of -2, we have +2. Instead of -4, we have +4. Instead of -6, we have +6. So this will be the graph of y equals absolute value of x. Let me draw it properly. So we will see that this section, y equals absolute value of x, will be of this shape, because all these negative y components will be positive. So it will be reflected across the x-axis to come into the positive side of y. And we have this shape. Let's take a more good example. Let's say we want to sketch the graph of y equals the absolute value of x minus 1. Now let's take the graph of y is equal to x minus 1 first. In this graph, when x is 0, y will be -1. If x is 0, y will be -1. If y is 0, x is 0, y will be -1, because this is 0. If y is 0, x will be 1, because this is 0. X minus 1, so 1 goes there, and x is 1. So we have 1. So this will be the graph of a straight line of y equals x minus 1. Now, if we come to the graph of y equals the absolute value of x minus 1, there will be no negative y value, because all the absolute, for example, if x is -1, we will have absolute value of -1 minus 1, which is absolute value of -2, and that is +2. Is that right? So all these values will be positive. Here, this -1 will be +1. All these negative y values will be positive, so there will be no negative y value. So this graph will be reflected across the x-axis, and we have a shape like this. A shape like this. So this section will not be there. And this will be the absolute value of x minus 1. All the negative y values will be reflected to be positive. Take another example. If you have y equals x squared minus 1, this is a parabola. This is x, this is y. We know when x is 0, y will be -1. So it must be here. If y is 0, we will have x squared minus 1 to be 0. And x squared will be 1. Therefore, x will be plus or minus 1. So we have 1 or -1. Of course. So this graph will be of the shape. It's a quadratic of the shape. It's a quadratic of the shape. What about y? So this is y equals x squared minus 1. What about y equals the absolute value of x squared minus 1? The absolute value means there will be no negative y value. So all these negative y values from this section of the graph will be positive. It will be reflected across the x-axis. So this -1 here, will come here to be +1. All these negative values will be positive. All this section in red is turning to the other side. So let me use yellow. So it will be reflected across this line in this shape. So there will be this section will not be there. So the shape of the graph will be like this. This is -1, 1, 1. The shape will be like this, reflected across this, and then like this. All right. Let's try to solve more example. Maybe one more or two more. If y equals x squared plus 4x minus 5, we want to sketch this graph and also sketch the graph of y is equal to the absolute value of x squared plus 4x minus 5. Let's sketch this graph and see. If x is 0, of course, y will be -5. So this is the point where the graph will cut the y-axis. If y is 0, we have x squared plus 4x minus 5 to be 0. And we solve this quadratic equation. If you do not know how to solve quadratic equation, please check my videos on solving quadratic equation. You can factorize. If you multiply two numbers and you get 0, it means one of them is 0. So we have -5, x is 0, y is 0, and 1, 0. It's a quadratic, so it has a turning point. We know that at the turning point, dy dx is 0. Anyway, you can check my video on curve sketching. So dy dx will be 2x plus 4 equals 0, and x becomes -2. If x is -2, we can put -2 in the original equation to find y. That would be -2 squared plus 4 times -2 minus 5. And that would be -9. So the turning point is -2, -9. So now we got the intercept and the turning point, so we can sketch it. Anyway, we can do a rough sketch, not to scale. Let's say this is x, this is y. 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8. If x is 0, y is -5. So we can put 2, 4, 6 or -5. If x is -5, 2, 4, 6 or -5 somewhere here, y is 0. If x is 1, y is 0. So this point. So what about the turning point? If x is -2, y is -9. So we have this point. So this is the shape of this graph. So we have the turning point here, passing through this point and passing through this point. This is the shape of the graph y is equal to x squared plus 4x minus 5. Now we want this graph. We want to sketch this graph here. This means the y values are all positive. So all these y values here, which are negative, must be positive. This section, y is negative. In this section, as we can see, that the y values below the x-axis are all negative. So these values must be reflected across the y-axis to become positive. So -9 must be +9. -5 must be +5. So if this section moves across the x-axis, we expect it to behave like this. This is the turning point. So this will be the turning point, which is -2, -9. It will be -2, +9. So this will be the turning point. So we expect this graph to be like this, passing through 5 and meet. So the actual shape, if drawn properly, will be like this, meeting at 5, -5, -2, 1, 5, 9, and moving up, crossing 5, and coming here. So this is the shape of y equals the absolute value of x squared minus 4x minus 5. Right. See you again in the next video.